Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Faith Colas, Director of Advocacy, Outreach, and Community Affairs for the Greater Milwaukee Urban League. On behalf of Dr. Eve Hall, CEO and President of the Greater Milwaukee Urban League, welcome to Conversation Wellness, a series that will inform you and keep you connected to the ongoing work of the Greater Milwaukee Urban League and the work of community partners. The Conversation Wellness series is a part of our mission to address inequities and covers a wide range of topics, including but not limited to health, home ownership, employment, financial literacy, education, entrepreneurship, voter education, and family. Our goal is to empower communities and change lives. Before I begin introductions, let me remind you to keep your microphones muted. We will be recording today's series, so if you have to leave us for any reason or you want to share today's session with others, we will be posting today's presentation on our website at tmul.org. You will also be able to find today's session on social media as well as our YouTube page. When we begin the session for questions, please place your questions in the chat. Now, at this time, I'd like to introduce our sponsor for today's Conversation Wellness, Kirk Heminger, Director of Marketing for Humana Eye Care. Kirk directs marketing and community partnerships for eye care. He joined eye care in April of 2017. In addition to over 14 years of insurance experience, he also has experience as a leader in marketing and generation technology industry and began his career as a copywriter for an advertising and graphic design agency. He has a journalism degree from the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, and his current responsibilities include leading a talented team of individuals to implement branding, advertising, lead generation, communications, public relations, events, sponsorships, and digital strategy. Please join me in welcoming Kurt Heminger. Thank you for joining us, Kurt.
Thank you, Faith. I appreciate it. I know that I'm not the main attraction, so I'll be quick, but you may be wondering, why is eye care here? Well, eye care is a wholly owned subsidiary of Humana. Some people may not know that. So together, Humana and Eye Care, we consider ourselves a wellness company. And a big area of our focus is on building relationships with community organizations like Greater Milwaukee Urban League. So I've been fortunate enough to work with Faith and Florida and Zainab and Dr. Hall at GMUL, and my experiences have been nothing but positive. So when it comes to community engagement, we call our top areas of focus our pillars. So for 2022, our pillars are chronic conditions, COVID support, disability support, healthcare services, health equity, healthy birth outcomes, mental health, shelter, which is a way of saying, homelessness and homelessness prevention, or homeless prevention, and food insecurity, our topic for today. So our community health workers are specialists in social determinants of health, including food insecurity, of course. So in fact, we like to think that we're doing more than talking the talk, we're walking the walk. So our associates are involved with community and gardening programs. So we're working side by side with members that allows them to address food insecurity by providing food at affordable prices that's healthy to eat. But more than that, it also addresses social isolation. It provides a form of exercise, and for some, it provides a way to address an alternative to maybe the addictive behaviors that they're struggling with. So we are big believers in solving food insecurity and that it can lead to better health outcomes. So in summary, we're very pleased to be involved today with Hunger Task Force and Greater Milwaukee Urban League. Thank you for allowing me to introduce myself, and I'll take it back to you guys.
Thank you, Kurt, and to Humana Eye Care, your entire team, for supporting the Greater Milwaukee Urban League and our ongoing efforts to address inequities by empowering communities and changing lives. We truly appreciate the partnership. And now, folks, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest and subject matter expert, Sherry Tussler, who is the Executive Director of Hunger Task Force and has been since 1997. She is a decision maker, a lobbyist, and fundraiser, as well as Hunger Task Force primary spokesperson. Sherry has extensive experience working with Milwaukee's homeless, survivors of sexual assault, and adults with mental illness. Sherry, welcome and thank you for joining us today. The virtual floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Faith. And I assume we're going to kick into, there we go. So Hunger Task Force. Hunger Task Force is probably known to most of you as the local food bank. We support food pantries, soup kitchens, and homeless shelters, but we're so much more than that. And Faith and I had a conversation recently about ending hunger and food as a human right. And we're going to challenge you guys to think about food as a human right and how we can potentially end hunger in Wisconsin and clearly in Milwaukee. Next slide. So who are we? We've been around since 1974. We were the Concerned Citizens for School Breakfast program. We were a group of advocates. We were registered dietitians inside the Milwaukee Public Schools, and we wanted to see school breakfast provided by the Milwaukee Public Schools way back in 1974. And we worked with the school board for more than 3 years before we were able to get 16 pilot programs to provide school breakfast inside MPS. At this present time, MPS will tell you that they provide breakfast universally, although that may not be true. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we go. But after we were successful in that organizing campaign to get breakfast into the Milwaukee Public Schools, we started working on access to the food stamp program. We now call that Food Share or SNAP, but back then food stamps were paper coupons and people were treated differently at the grocery store. They had to stand in a food stamp only line. It's not only illegal, but undignified. And so we advocated for equal treatment of people under food share. And then in the early 1980s, we had a recession and WISN TV 12 created a program called Food for Families. You've probably all heard about it a million times, but at the holidays, we collect food in food drive barrels at grocery stores. And they did that with the Marine Corps Reserve at the time. And in the end, they couldn't decide where the food should go. Well, they came to the group that they called the Hunger Task Force, which is how we got our name. And we determined, because we had registered dietitians still hanging around from that school breakfast advocacy work, that we should give people the right kind of food based on their diet, their religion, their culture, their household size. So we sophisticated food distribution very early in our history, and in a way unlike other food banks to this day do it across the nation. So Milwaukee is really pretty unique that way. Our mission is to feed people today and end future hunger. The two things are very different, and I'm going to tell you more about that. But you can feed someone today, but they're going to be hungry later today. And unless you end future hunger, you're really not completing the mission. There are so many charities that are established across the city that feed people, whether they're food pantries, soup kitchens, homeless shelters, senior dining sites. We're even delivering food to senior public housing, but all we're doing is feeding those folk. And ending future hunger involves public policy initiatives and advocacy work to change the landscape of how people access food when they have little or no money for food. Our core values are stewardship, which means that we handle the resources that we get from the community wisely and thoughtfully. Justice, because we want to create equal access to food for people, regardless of where they live or what their lived experience is in the community. Compassion, because we care. Seems pretty basic, right? And the one we talk about probably the most is dignity, because it's not good enough to just give people food or any old food. It's important to respect who they are as a person and to listen to them and understand that the foods that we give them are the foods that they need and that they want. Sometimes people will say, oh, beggars can't be choosy, and we disagree. We disagree wholeheartedly. We believe that everyone should get the food that they want and that they need. And so those things like diet, religion, and culture that affect what you eat or guide what you eat must be respected at all times in order to create that dignity. Next slide. So what's hunger look like in Milwaukee? It's pretty bad, honestly. It's pretty bad, and it shouldn't be this bad. There are all kinds of federal supports that could and should be working in our community that still aren't, regardless of what's happened with the pandemic. And I will talk a little on pandemic, but here we got 170,000 people living in poverty. A lot of kids. We always say that about half of all of the people that Hunger Task Force assists are children. And so some people might have it in their head that, oh, we're helping that homeless guy on the corner, or we're helping a family where, you know, it's a single parent mom, but it also includes things like whole families, grandparents who are caretaking their children. It includes seniors, lots of seniors that the Hunger Task Force assists. And so those kids in particular, I think everyone would agree that no child should be hungry. That if we had a child at our house visiting and we were sitting down to eat, that we would set a plate for that child. And so it's critical that we always think about those children and whether or not they will thrive, whether or not they will be healthy, whether or not they can learn based on the foods that we give them and the foods that our institutions and systems give them. And so we're constantly advocating for higher quality food for our kids. Our food pantries dot Milwaukee County. Hunger Task Force supports the vast majority of food pantries that exist in Milwaukee County, but they must be qualified. During the pandemic, a lot of groups came forward and said, we need food for this group of people or that group of people. And they weren't actually a food pantry before that, and they didn't understand why we weren't giving food. And then things got really conflicted with the Trump administration when they started just literally delivering truckloads of food to communities across the nation and delivering the food in parking lots. Food pantries, just like your office, have heat and lights and refrigeration. We want to store food safely. We want to make sure that the food pantry is open when people need it. We want to make sure that people can get food somewhere close to where they live. And again, we want people to get the amount and type of foods that respect their household size, diet, religion, and culture. And so we qualify food pantries and we provide them with an awful lot of support and training. At the beginning, they may just call me and say, God called me and said I should open a food pantry. But we'll ask some clarifying questions like, where is your proposed food pantry? If they tell us it's in a garage, we say no. But if they tell us it's in their church, we say yes, let's look at that. If it's across the street from an existing pantry, we may say no. But if you're in a zip code like 53224, yes, let's do it. Because we still don't have enough food pantries in Milwaukee County to cover all of Milwaukee County's turf adequately, although we have a high concentration of pantries in certain zip codes, like 53204. And so we always ask ourselves, if a person in need of emergency food can get it on the day that they need it in a neighborhood close to where they live. And if there's a question about where to find a food pantry, people can go to our website. Due to COVID and all the crises surrounding it, we actually created an interactive map that shows all of our food services on that map, and you can click on the various icons and find when that pantry is open that's close to you, find when that soup kitchen is serving, find when that homeless shelter is open and assisting people, and then things like the summer food service program or our senior stock box are all on those are on that map. And we found that we needed to do that because during COVID, pantries closed. Just like buildings closed, offices closed, and people went home. Pantries are mostly run by food pantry volunteers. Only 1 in 10 pantries has a paid staff person. Most of the volunteers were seniors themselves. And so if you recall back to the early days of the pandemic, it was a very scary time. No one knew what to expect, and we were all going to shelter in place for 6 weeks. Turned out it was 3 years. But some of the pantries just shuttered and never reopened. And so we are always monitoring food access within that pantry network. We're currently serving about 31,000 people monthly. Surprisingly, that number is down from nearly 50,000 before the pandemic. And it's down because of the food stamp program. And I'll talk more about that soon. Our meal programs, many of them shuttered during the pandemic. Most of them have reopened. Not everyone still feels comfortable going to a congregate site and sitting across the table from a stranger during COVID. And so those numbers are down and depressed as well. But the sites are open and accessible within the communities of need. Next slide. All right, so we're going to talk about that first side of our mission, which is feeding people today. It's necessary, it's important, it's critical, but it's not how you end hunger. And we spend a lot of time moving food. Almost 10 million pounds of food will come in and out of Hunger Task Force every single year. During the pandemic, we were up as far as 13 million pounds of food moving just here in Milwaukee County, just to that network of pantries and senior sites. If you can advance. So the food bank, that's the thing everybody knows about us here in Milwaukee County. But if you were to go to Madison or Chicago, which is the regional office of the USDA, they would say that the Hunger Task Force are lobbyists. And I'll talk more about that during Ending Future Hunger. But here in Milwaukee, we're best known for the food bank, supplying people with the foods that they need. We adopted something called My Plate, which is the USDA's Guide for Healthy Living, about 8 years ago. And so our food that we distribute is sourced from the federal government, from donations that happen during community-wide events, and from donations that happen when people give us money and we buy full truckloads of food. 100% of the food that we give is healthy and in good condition. Not all food banks purchase food, and most food banks in the nation actually source food from large corporations and store chains. And so oftentimes we may get a complaint from a food pantry. Our milk is sour. The meat is gray or brown. That's not the Hunger Task Force. Hunger Task Force gives only healthy foods. Each pantry coordinator is allowed to order food based on how many households they served in the prior month. Here in Milwaukee, you will not hear tales of woe that you might hear in other cities where they say we're out of food. It's a crisis. As long as Hunger Task Force is here as the bank, we're going to assure that every single pantry has enough food to serve the same number of people that it served last month. And knowing that, we can also fill emergency orders. And so Hunger Task Force is able to measure the impact of things like recession, inflation, COVID, need, less need, more need, based on the total number of individuals served by each pantry. 47 pantries in that network, 20 soup kitchens and homeless shelters. In terms of serving our seniors, I see that Galen is joining us today, and she also serves seniors. We are not Meals on Wheels, but we're a lot of other things. Hunger Task Force runs a federal commodity program called StockBox. It's actually the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, but that's a lot of words to say. StockBox makes it easier for our seniors and the people we work with to understand that those are foods that are used to stock a food pantry at your house. And so it's going to be canned goods, cereals, juices, canned meats or pouched meats. All of it is pretty much going to be shelf-stable foods, but it's a supplemental program intended to improve the diet of a senior by giving them additional protein and calcium and vitamin C, which are things that they may be lacking if they, again, don't have enough money to buy food. Seniors are very proud, and we do our best to be compassionate and respectful of their situations. And encourage them to apply for the food share program, which they may not have applied for even during the pandemic. But we do go out and deliver StockBox at the senior dining sites as a drive-through operation currently and continuing. We anticipate probably through the spring of next year. And we also go to senior public housing and we deliver the stock box directly to where people live. We combine that with our mobile market, which is listed here as the last bullet point. Our mobile market is a single aisle grocery store on wheels. It is a NASCAR trailer pulled by a pickup truck. It is a store that we operate in cooperation with Piggly Wiggly. Piggly Wiggly is in Oak Creek, and we load the store with fresh fruit and vegetables, as well as milk and meat, and we drive the store to where the senior lives. And so we will combine a stock box delivery at public housing, someplace like College Court or Highland Gardens or Cherry. And we will combine the delivery of the stock box with the delivery of the mobile market, so the senior can go on board and obtain produce, meat, and dairy that they are purchasing. And it's clear that this is not a mobile food pantry, it is a grocery store. If you have not shopped the mobile market, we encourage you to go to the Hunger Task Force website and check out the mobile market. It is a store for everyone. But if a low-income person goes on board and they're using food share, they will receive 50% off of their purchase, which is huge. The incentive is a program that comes from the federal government. It's called the GUS-NIP program, or Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program. And it is a new advent of the federal government, which is trying to incentivize the purchase of healthy foods by reducing the price of those foods. We, as others, have heard from many low-income people that they want to eat more fresh produce, they just can't afford fresh produce. And so we make it affordable by decreasing the price, by giving that incentive to 50% off. We encourage people to shop the mobile market, and it does have stops in the morning and the afternoon, 5 days a week. It's all over Milwaukee County, and it still has some open slots. We had to reduce some spaces that we went to during the pandemic. We weren't allowed to go to certain senior public housing. It also serves people with disabilities at Industries for the Blind and Independence First. If there are other organizations or locations that it could possibly be at, we encourage people to call us and let us know that. Seniors are also eligible for something called Senior Farmers Market Vouchers, and that's $25 in paper coupons that the state provides them through the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. Those $25 in coupons allow them to shop at a farmer's market during the summer months. It's intended, again, to get produce into their diet, but also to help Wisconsin farmers, because you can only buy Wisconsin produce. Those vouchers are currently available, and so if you know of a senior that still has not received a voucher, they can go online at Hunger Task Force and we will mail it to them, or they can go to Washington Park next Tuesday between 9 and noon, where we will be giving them out, and the mobile market will be there, and we will also be giving stock box. So we really tend to sort of surround and love up our seniors because they've lived full lives. They sometimes need our assistance. Their medical expenses may be higher than they can afford, and they may cut into their food buying budget by paying for their other costs. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that they have access to healthy food and that they're never ever worried about skipping meals. Hunger Task Force also operates a farm. That farm is located in Franklin, Wisconsin. It is the space surrounding the Milwaukee County House of Correction. So it's on 68 between Putes and Ryan Road. We inherited that farm space, which had been a prison work farm since 1946, when then County Executive Scott Walker made the decision that it was no longer the mission of Milwaukee County to operate a farm. There was produce in the fields at that point. We rescued about 30,000 pounds of produce, but the county board, which was primarily Democratic at the time, made the decision that the Hunger Task Force should operate the farm into the future. You are not looking at a farmer. I don't know a lot about farming, but we took on the farm and we hired farmers. out of the College of Agricultural Life and Life Sciences in Madison. We brought on experienced folk who could operate tractors, and we mechanized the farm. And we now grow 500,000 pounds of fresh produce, both vegetables and fruit at the farm. And we distribute that through our food pantry network and to our seniors at those senior dining sites. They're really excited to get fresh, real produce grown right here in Wisconsin. And I always say we grow everything from asparagus to zucchini. So if you can grow it in Wisconsin, we're probably growing it. We have sophisticated what we grow because we try to listen to what people are asking for. Probably our most popular thing would be collard greens, followed directly by sweet corn. But we grow tomatoes, we grow lettuces, peppers of all types, cucumbers. There are a half a dozen orchards at the farm, and so we grow both apples and pears that we are able to distribute. Probably not nearly as many apples and pears as we could eat in this community, but they're helpful and people appreciate getting them, as well as melons that we grow. The farm has been in our care since 2006. And the expanse of it is pretty amazing. If you've never been there, we encourage you to visit the farm. We encourage you to volunteer at the farm. We rely on more than 5,000 people volunteering at the farm in order to grow food. On a day as beautiful as today, people could be out there either planting or what we call cultivating, which really means weeding, the farm fields and picking the products. We take them to a harvest house that's located at the farm, and we wash all the produce, and we bag it or box it to send out to the programs. And so at the end of the season, we'll do a survey. How did you like our produce? And people say, it's as nice as Sendik's. And again, that's all about that dignity issue. And we want to get people the foods that they like, that they recognize, and that are presented to them in the best possible way. So the farm is pretty darn amazing. If you haven't been there, like I said, you really should check it out. Next slide. Ending future hunger. This is the big kahuna, people. When Faith started and she and I had this conversation, I don't know, about a month ago, how do you end future hunger? And is that possible? Most of us just accept the fact that there's always going to be hungry people. And it's kind of unnecessary and not right. So next slide, I want to tell you why and what we can do about it. Anti-hunger advocacy. What I want you to do is imagine that you could be an advocate for ending hunger by imagining a world where there's enough food for everyone. We live in Wisconsin. This is the dairy state. We produce so much food here. We export food out of our state and out of our nation. We feed other people. We've been watching this whole horrible thing happen in Ukraine, and it's affecting the world economy and access to food, because Ukraine is a lot like the Midwest. They grow so much food. So one should ask themselves why, when we grow so much food, is 1 in 4 kids in the city of Milwaukee waking up with no food in their house? Like, that should trouble you to your core, because this is not sub-Saharan Africa where there is no food. This is not a tidal wave went over an island and destroyed everything, so there is no food. There's food. We just don't get it to people. And we don't get it to them because of our political system, because of capitalism, because of our economy. And because maybe somewhere inside each one of us, we believe that somebody else doesn't deserve something like food. And as a result, we're not going to make sure that they get it. We're not going to go to the polls and say, I'm going to vote for somebody who believes in making sure that food is a human right. I'm not even going to ask that question. Food, shelter, clothing, human rights. But we also live in a world where a lot of our rights have been taken away, especially recently. So we got to question why we're not allowing kids to eat here in Milwaukee. So anti-hunger public policy involves us having lobbyists on staff, and I'm one of them. And our job is to educate elected officials, bureaucrats, key decision makers, and frankly, the wealthy about why we don't have access to food and then what things we can do to change that. And we talked about food pantries and charitable access to food from the federal government, but there are a whole series of programs that the government has in place, literally from birth to death, that feed people. And if those programs are well run and accessible, we reduce hunger. So COVID's been a really great example of that. Before COVID, people on food share were called bums. We wanted to drug test them. We wanted them to work. We had all these systems in place to disqualify them from getting help to buy food. I personally feel like that's kind of ignorant, because when we give them help to buy food, they first of all buy food, and second of all, it helps our economy. The food share program, or food stamps, what they call federally is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is the largest of all federal nutrition programs. It is the thing that feeds people. And so at the minute that COVID happened, we declared a federal public health emergency and a state public health emergency, and we increased the base benefits of food share. A senior living in public housing went from $20 a month in food share to $250 a month. That's a big deal. Families had their food share benefits amplified dramatically. And what that meant was that people could get help from the federal government to buy food. It helped our economy, it helped our farmers, it helped our food producers, it helped the transportation industry, it helped the grocery store heroes. And it reduced the total number of people that needed charity. And that's why our numbers went down. And so we've proven that food share works. And we advocate for a fully accessible food share program. Sadly, here in Milwaukee, in terms of context, our food share program is not well run. Sadly, our welfare office is getting ready to move from 1220 West Fleet, where it has historically been since before I had this job and 20 years before that. And it's moving to a place on 64th and Call near the Haven Woods Forest. And when that program moves away from that location, people are going to be harmed. And a decision to move that program wasn't made here in Milwaukee, it was made by state government. And when we make that program inaccessible, when people who are houseless can't get to it, when people can't find the location because they've never heard of Call, K-A-U-L, and when they get there and they see a giant warehouse wrapped by fencing with barbed wire, they're not going to feel like that's a human services department. And so we are stripping people of access to the food share program when we make bad decisions about how they can get the help that they need on the day that they need it. And so Hunger Task Force will and has been advocating for a fully accessible food share program, one that serves people and provides a full array of customer service as it does in other counties across Wisconsin. And I'd be happy to answer questions about that, but I won't harp on it for too long. I just want to say food share works. We also heard about infant formula shortages like a month or so, 2 months ago. The whole world was going upside down because we couldn't get infant formula to moms that needed it. Even though we support breastfeeding as the first and best option for infants up until age 12 months, not everybody can do it. And grandmothers surely can't do it for their grandchildren. So infant formula is there, and some infants need specialty infant formulas, and those infant formulas were wholly unavailable. And so we were scrambling to not only get formula to people across the state, which we did do, but also to get specialty formulas to infants that were in crisis. Just imagine being that mom and going, I don't know where I'm going to get my infant formula next. We had people reporting that they were driving to other states looking for a specific brand of infant formula. We helped a mom in New Jersey who was beside herself because she couldn't find a specialty formula. When the WIC program is fully enrolled, people get access to not just formula, but nutrition education, and they also get a debit card to buy healthy foods for themselves and their children up until that child enrolls in school. So just another federal nutrition program that COVID sort of brought up and made us think about. You shouldn't have to go to a food pantry for infant formula. Food banks should not be supplying thousands and thousands of dollars of infant formula. The WIC program is there and it's accessible, and we're encouraging pregnant women, postpartum women, and their children up to age 6 to participate in WIC. The next bullet point is nutrition education, and Hunger Task Force does plenty of that. We employ a registered dietitian and a dietitian educator. We are, speaking the mantra of healthy eating and My Plate. The My Plate, again, that USDA guide for healthy eating, half of the plate should be fruit and vegetables. So ask yourself, every time you sit down to eat, is half of my plate fruit and vegetables? Most of us would go. The other half of the plate should be lean meats and whole grains. And then there should be some dairy. We have a tendency to load up those proportions. And what Hunger Task Force is doing when it supplies food to those food pantries is we're only making available healthy foods, because we see that as a public health situation. I'm sure iCare Humanifolk can agree that when people eat foods that aren't good for them, they suffer health problems. And over the long term, things like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, commonplace. And it's all about what we eat. And so when we made that decision to only give healthy foods to our food pantries, no one at the food pantry said, "Where are my cookies?" But a lot of the people that served at the pantry said, "Shouldn't everybody get some cookies?" Yeah, they can probably get cookies on their own. We're going to invest our resources in making sure that people get the foods that they should get to be healthy. And when we only give them healthy foods, we're going to lower that blood sugar. We're going to make sure that blood pressure is better. And we have proven with some of our partnerships with the medical college that it actually does work, and it makes a huge difference in people's lives. And if we just gave people less carbohydrates, we'd all be in much better shape. Some of our staff are in the Milwaukee Public Schools working with 3rd to 5th graders. I wish that every school, just like every school should have an art teacher and every school should have a gym teacher. All of those electives are gone, but teachers, the old home economics class is gone. And when we teach children to eat their fruit and vegetables, we are making a difference in their lives. And our experience is that the sweet spot is somewhere between 3rd and 5th grade, that you'll still do what we call taking one polite bite. And so we give the kids access to fruit and vegetables. We teach them simple whole food preparation that they can then mimic at their house. And we pre and post test them over a course of a year. So we're with them for the whole year, including all summer long when they get to visit the farm and see how food is grown and plant their own garden. And hopefully we leave an impression that's lasting for them to eat well and to choose to eat more fruits and vegetables. Summer Meals is on here, and it should really be on the other screen, which is Feeding People Today. But it is going to end future hunger if we give access to kids all over the city meals that they need during the summer to remain healthy. When school recesses, breakfast and lunch that they normally get at school disappears. Every parent who's listening knows it's common sense. As soon as school recesses, the kids eat you out of house and home. And then you're like, I don't know what else to do. The good news is that there are hundreds of sites across Milwaukee County, the public schools, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the Ys, youth service organizations, parks, where children can get a free summer meal. They can get breakfast, they can get lunch. Sometimes they're even getting supper. And in some cases, particularly in the parks, they can attend with their parent, and the parent will also eat thanks to our friends at Kohl's department stores. Summer meals are necessary because if the kids go back after 10 or 12 weeks of languishing without regular access to food, they're not only hungry, they're dulled. They've gone all summer long without getting public education, and now they're trying to remediate, and they haven't eaten well. As a former homeless shelter director, I can say that people would come in and they had been exposed to terrible things, but they also hadn't been eating regularly and sleeping regularly. And when you skip eating and sleeping, you can't think well. And so how can those children that go hungry all summer long start in September at school and be ready to go? And so oftentimes that whole first month is spent remediating and hoping that those school meals are catching up with those kids. So the problem of poverty and especially urban hunger for Milwaukee's children is deep and challenging. We have done many things over the course of the history of Hunger Task Force to increase access. And our summer meals program basically was referred to by the Chicago Midwest region as the Milwaukee model, because we brought everybody into a room that did summer meals, whether it was the clubs, the schools, the youth service organizations, the parks, both city and county, and then the meal providers, groups like the Social Development Commission, the Milwaukee Center for Independence, Salvation Army, and we all concurred on where the locations should be. We made sure that every kid had access, and then groups like Kohl's department stores gave us the money to make ends meet where the program might not make ends meet. And so it's a pretty fabulous program. It's going to serve hundreds of thousands of meals all summer long to kids in need. And so there's no reason why Milwaukee's children should not be well fed. And it's a program that's been replicated by other communities. Next slide. So, in our spare time during the pandemic, we organized the Hunger Relief Federation of Wisconsin. We had been teaching people about the Hunger Task Force model, other food banks in Sheboygan, Racine. Groups were calling out to us and saying, we don't know how to access food. We don't know how to provide the healthy foods. We don't know how Hunger Task Force keeps pulling this off. Can you teach us the ropes? And so all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and we had about 30 members in the Hunger Relief Federation that were dotting the state of Wisconsin, and it exploded. Food pantries from across the state needed help. They needed food, they needed money, they needed to figure some stuff out. The tribal nations joined on board. And during that time when Trump was president, there were these Farmers to Families food boxes, and we were able to leverage them and deliver them to hub locations across the state of Wisconsin to assuage the problem of hunger and the lack of access to federal commodities in specific communities that were rural, remote, indigenous, and low income. And so we targeted those groups and we got federal help through Senator Baldwin's office to get food to people in need during that crisis time. What we learned from that, and we learned a lot, was that people needed a pre-packed box of food in many of those areas. And so last December, Governor Evers gifted Hunger Task Force $10 million to purchase Wisconsin foods. And we began aggregating a box called the Badger Box. What we learned was that the closer food was to us, the more likely we were to receive it. And so you can't wait forever for the federal government to help you, but if you have the resources to buy the foods that are local, you can do that. And so when the pandemic first happened, dairy farmers were spilling their milk and people were donating money to Hunger Task Force. And so we made an active decision to purchase milk from Wisconsin dairy farmers. We saved a number of cheese co-ops and dairy co-ops from literally going under during the pandemic because their prior customers were restaurants and schools. We delivered nearly 8 million pounds of dairy across the state using $4.6 million of donations that we got from the average person in the general community. And what we learned was that those Wisconsin farmers needed our help. And so this Badger Box that we're now aggregating includes milk from Sassy Cow, bacon from Newski's, S&R eggs out of Union Grove, cheeses from Chalet Cooperative, Wisconsin grass-fed beef, Wisconsin pork. Everything in this box is Wisconsin, and it's all tasty and good for you. And people are amazed at the quality. And going back to that whole issue of dignity, it really has brought dignity to people. I received an email from an older adult who said when she opened her box, it was like taking a vacation up north. And that said a lot to me about how successful we were in deciding what the contents of this box would be. We continue to distribute the box across the state of Wisconsin to hubs and making sure that almost every county has been served, and we're continuing to expand. We've got a few more counties to go. The program will operate through December of this year, at which point we hope to advocate for it to continue to be in the state's budget. Next slide. So on the horizon, food share unwinding. Some stuff is about to hit the fan. When we lose our our public health emergency, people are going to lose access to food share, those higher payments, and healthcare. Flexibilities in healthcare will go away. We anticipate that that public health emergency will elapse sometime between November and January. There is an election in there, so it could go all the way to January. But when it happens, that senior is going to go from $250 to $20, and we're going to be right back at it. Unless somehow or other, we all work together to advocate for an end to hunger by holding our elected officials accountable and by asking both our state and our federal government to invest in ending hunger through the food share program. We are currently been made aware by the state, who used ARPA dollars to look at all of their databases. There are 92,000 households in Milwaukee County alone that are still not on food share. We're calling them the missing. We're going to throw them on the back of milk cartons, and we're going to put some word out to everybody, but there are 92,000 people who still don't have food share and could get food share. All they have to do is go to one of our application sites or go online and apply, or use their telephone to do it telephonically. If every single one of those households got the food share they're entitled to, there would be $23 million more in Milwaukee's food economy. All of that is federal funding, 100%. It's not your state tax dollar. It's not about your state representative. This is all federal stuff. We will be taking our Food for Families program, which has been around since we've been around, virtual, and we will be having those food drives. I'm going to skip to the next slide because I know we're running low on time. How can you get involved? Well, you can clearly donate. We always like it when you donate your time or your money. Hunger Task Force is wholly donor supported. We do get some help from the federal government in the form of food, but we operate based on fundraising, and so that's a lot of work. Volunteers are welcome at Hunger Task Force to help us distribute food, build food boxes, and to work at the farm. We use volunteers in every aspect of everything we do, and we love having them. And so anyone is welcome to come. School groups, your congregation, your workplace, just your friends. Bring them on down. We'll figure it out together. Most important though, in all of this, Faith and I can probably agree, is that the thing that you can do to get involved is to be an advocate. To learn from today that there's enough food for everybody. We just have to decide that everybody should have access to it, that food is a human right. And all we have to do as a community, as a political system, as capitalists, because we all are, is to say, I got enough, what about the other guy? And can I help him out? And how do I do that? I want y'all to remember that every single time you vote, you need to hold your elected official, regardless what level of government they're at, accountable for food as a human right. Ask them, how do you feel about food? Is it a human right? Who's going to say no to that? If they say yes and say, what are you doing about it? What? So I think I'm going to end there. Is there another slide in here? Yeah, more about fun things you can do with the Hunger Task Force. German Fest, State Fair, Irish Fest, all those festivals are back. Almost every one of them likes to pick up its attendance by offering you an opportunity to get in cheap or free if you bring a food item. This is one of those ways that we make sure that there's peanut butter in every single bag. And so people love peanut butter unless they're allergic to it for breakfast, lunch, and supper. So we're emphasizing peanut butter right now, but you can bring what your heart holds for you. And if you'd rather bring spaghetti sauce, you're welcome to do that. But we hope to see you at one of those fun events. And I think there's one more slide. Questions? I feel like I talked way too much.
Well, I think there is one more slide after this, after the question slide. So while we maybe take some questions. And I know that Kirk Heminger, our sponsor, has put in the chat, while a public health emergency and date is not yet set, Wisconsin DHS is starting to mail notices to select people that documentation will be needed to keep their health benefits. So that's important for us all to note. And Sherry, I just want to say thank you so much for this detailed presentation and all of the ways that we can get involved to support hunger as a human right, how we can support the work that you're doing, and each of us that are in specific industries and lanes that are part of this presentation today, we can start to think about how is it that what we do touches hunger as a human right. So you have a friend in the Greater Milwaukee Urban League, and we will be working alongside you to help advocate food as a human right. And of course, we'll talk about that more in detail, but I want to remind folks that they can go to hungertaskforce.org, follow them on social media, visit their website. This was a presentation that not only addressed the issue, but addresses it in a way where we can do so in all of our work with dignity and respect. And I think I think a lot of people think that when people have less than they do, that they should just be thankful for what it is that they get. But you made some fabulous points in helping us understand that, everybody, when they're hungry, they want to eat the food they like, right? And I think it's awesome that Hunger Task Force provides healthy food, not just food, but healthy food. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Sherry, is how many food pantry partners do you have?
There's a total of 47 here in Milwaukee County and about 153 across the state.
And if you were to put a timeline, just your wish list, if you will, on when we could end hunger, what would that realistically look like? Because now that we know that we can end hunger, I don't know how many folks on the line that are joining us even thought that we could end hunger. What would that look like for you? A timeline?
That could happen easily during my career and in, clearly my lifetime. It shouldn't take long at all. It's just about where's the food and how do we get it to people? And why don't we choose to feed our own first?
I love that you shared that Wisconsin is a pivotal point for providing food, not just here in Wisconsin, but for the country. So if we can provide food for the country, we can most definitely provide food and enough food for all the families that live in Wisconsin, no matter where they live in Wisconsin.
It's a fact. There's a lot of rural areas and very remote areas in the state. I just got back from travel. I was in Red Cliff, Wisconsin. I was in Bad River. I saw a small town in Prescott, hungry people lining up, looking for assistance, not knowing about that food share program, or in the case of tribal folk, maybe not being eligible for the food share program and needing alternatives. And so how do we make sure that those people get access to that food, especially after something like the ARPA funds elapse? There are challenges there, but we've learned that the federal government can print money when it needs to address a crisis that we're all facing. We should realize that when the crisis is over with, there will still be some people who will be challenged and need our help, and that the resources were there and could continue to be there for those people.
Well, Sherry, I want to thank you again for joining us today. It looks like we may be able to give a few moments of time back to everyone. I want to thank our sponsor, Humana Eye Care, and Kurt Heminger. Sherry, again, thank you for all the work that you're doing, for joining us this month on Conversation Wellness. We are here to support you. You can count on the Greater Milwaukee Urban League. I want to remind you folks that This session will be on our YouTube station as well as our website, tmul.org. And as Sherry mentioned, August 9th, Tuesday, August 9th is an election day. We want to remind you to go and vote, to take a couple people with you. And if you need some additional information for voting, you can visit myvote.wi.gov. Want to thank you all for joining us today. Have a safe day. Have a wonderful rest of the week and a great weekend. Thank you, Sherry Tessler, and to the entire Hunger Task Force team. Take
Thank you,
care.
and thanks to the audience.